All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have you here on the webinar. We're going to talk today about some amazing stuff happening in New Orleans and across Louisiana, and we've got some incredible speakers. I'm in their way with just a few housekeeping notes before we dig right in here. So first things first, please know that we are recording this. We will absolutely post a link to this in just a few days. All of you are currently muted, but we still want to hear your questions. We want you to engage with us. Today, we are celebrating how the charter school community has gone above and beyond to serve families during the coronavirus pandemic. We're also going to recognize the efforts of our 2020 Above and Beyond honorees, all of which have truly served their communities in creative ways, including some ways that can be replicated at any school. We're really focusing on a deep dive into the partnership efforts underway in New Orleans, where charter schools and community partners are working together to meet the city's needs. We're also going to share practical tips on how to support your community and take your questions. Now, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, President and CEO of the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, Nina Rees. Hi, Nina.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that introduction. It's so nice to have you all on this webinar. Welcome to National Charter Schools Week. As Erin mentioned, the focus of our webinar today is to shine a light on New Orleans and how New Orleans has responded to the pandemic. Before we start though, Senator Mary Landrieu, who's also on our board of directors, is going to offer some introductory remarks about New Orleans, given her background in setting up the school district that we currently have, which is an all-charter district. Before we do that though, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about National Charter Schools Week. This is a week that we celebrate the contributions that charter schools make every day to the fabric of public education. This year, however, we're particularly proud of the contributions charter schools have made in meeting the unique needs of their students. Over 60% of our students are on the free and reduced lunch program, and many of these students were vulnerable before the pandemic hit. So we're extremely proud of the quick mid-course corrections that our charter schools have already made to meet the needs of their families. But within this pool of excellence, there are also a subset of schools that have gone above and beyond the call of duty to meet the needs of their communities. And so this year, for the first time, we are honoring 10 of these schools that were nominated by you. These are schools that have not only met the needs of their own families, but they have also gone above and beyond the call of duty to meet the needs of their communities. Please join me in watching a short video about these 10 outstanding schools.
I apologize. It seems that something has gone wrong with the video on my end. Here it goes. So sorry. The video is pausing a lot. So I think that probably the best way to go about this, Nina, is for us to dive into the panel and share the video as a follow-up to everyone so they can see those amazing schools on their own time. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. So my apologies for that. Not quite sure what's going on there, but we'll go ahead and keep going so that we can protect your time. So back to you, Nina.
Sorry, I cannot turn my camera on, but I just wanted to take this moment to introduce Senator Mary Landrieu, who is also on our board of directors. Senator Landrieu has a long history of serving the needs of low-income students at the federal level, and we're extremely proud to have such a great advocate and champion of children, low-income children everywhere on our board. So Senator Landrieu, without further ado, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Nina, and thank you, Aaron. I'm sorry for the technical difficulty, but hopefully we'll all get to see that wonderful video because it's just amazing to think about all of the schools, particularly so many of our charter schools that are so flexible and agile to be able to really adjust to this new challenge that's presented itself. So I'm really looking forward to seeing schools around the country and what they've done. Nina, it's been a pleasure to serve with you all these many years on the National Alliance, and thank you for your advocacy for children all over the country, not only in charter schools, but in traditional schools as we fight to give every child the excellent, free, accessible education they deserve. I couldn't be prouder to bring to you all today and to help bring to you all today this panel of experts that will be presented in just a moment. But I wanted to give just a minute of background. Louisiana was one of the first states that stepped up over 20 years ago to accept the challenge by several presidents, President Clinton and President Bush, to name only two, but followed by President Obama, to really help push our schools to be more accountable to the children that we serve. Not just, certain children from middle class or upper class backgrounds, but for all children, particularly children that are in the margins, that come from disadvantaged families. And for many years, some of our school systems were, in my opinion, the opinion of many, leaving those children out. So Louisiana really stepped up, and over the course of the last 20 years, implemented through a series of pretty significant steps, both with Democratic and Republican governors, with elected and appointed boards, helped to put in sort of a foundation for that work. The city of New Orleans stepped up in an amazing way, accelerated this through the catastrophe of Katrina to basically create a system of schools that are independent, flexible, excellent, accessible, and open choice in the city of New Orleans. Quite an amazing accomplishment. Our graduation rates have moved from below 50% to over 75%. Our ACT scores for our graduating seniors continue to be higher than cities of comparable demographics. The New York Times and other notable news organizations and surveyors have indicated that New Orleans school system has improved faster than almost any in the country. So with that said, I am so proud to introduce to you all Caroline Romer, who runs the Louisiana Charter School Association, to introduce our panelist from New Orleans. Caroline is from an amazing political family. Her father served as governor, brother on the Bessie board, but Caroline in her own right has been a leader of school reform in trying to advocate for both in innovative charter schools and traditional schools where we can collaborate to really promote the idea of excellence and equity for all of our children. And she has served in that position now, Caroline, for over 15 years. So I turn it over to Caroline to introduce our wonderful panelists. And I thank you all for being so interested in our charter school movement and how charter schools can really help all schools through this, coronavirus challenge that we have, and continue to reach and educate all of our children. Thank you, Carolyn, for your great leadership.
I'm not able to get my video going. Erin, it says that you're in control of that, so FYI.
So strange.
It's okay. Technology these days. I was one of those people that.
Hey, there you are.
Yes. Hi. I still have like a blinking light on my, VHS player. Anyway, thank you so much, Senator, for the nice words. It's always nice to be with you, and you truly are a champion for Louisiana and frankly the rest of the country related to kids and education, and greatly appreciate you. Everyone that's watching today and joining us, welcome to New Orleans. We're really excited to have you. I have a favorite quote from a guy named Chris Rose about New Orleans. He says, "We dance even if there's no radio. We drink at funerals. We talk too much and laugh too loud and live too large. And frankly, we're suspicious of others who don't." I think that fits perfectly. And so I welcome you to New Orleans virtually, and really look forward to seeing some of you, I hope, in person next year when the National Alliance hosts their conference in New Orleans. Very excited to have our panel today. Excited that they're all native to Louisiana. They're all former educators, and I consider all of them friends and peers in this work. We have some really good questions lined up for them. First, I'll do a couple introductions. I'll start with my friend Patrick Dobard. Patrick is currently the CEO of New Schools for New Orleans, NSNO. NSNO is a nonprofit that's been committed now for longer than I've been around to helping create high quality schools and support schools here in the New Orleans area. Patrick and I first met actually when he was doing work with the state and as superintendent of the Recovery School District. He's from New Orleans, and before he started all of those other things, he was a fabulous educator in the classrooms of New Orleans. I'm also excited to have Dr. Henderson Lewis join us. Dr. Lewis is the superintendent for NOLA Public Schools. He started that job back in 2015 and I think he's the youngest superintendent that New Orleans has had in that position, but he comes with an incredible amount of experience, over 20 years as both an educator and an administrator. And uniquely, I think it's also important to point out that Dr. Lewis has also been an elected school board member in a neighboring parish to Orleans. So he brings a lot of different perspectives. We also have Jamar McNeely joining us. Jamar is the CEO of Inspire NOLA, which means he's the man with the vision. He makes things happen in that organization. It's turned out to be one of the real gems of education in New Orleans, but also in Louisiana and our country, and appreciate the work he's done. He co-founded Inspire NOLA back in 2013, and he too comes with experience as both an educator, and I think it's fun that he also was a budget analysis. So he can not only deliver on academics, but he knows money. And then last but not least, save the best for last, Rhonda Aloise. Rhonda is the executive director of KIPP New Orleans and is a former educator herself through Teach for America. And as I said, all of our panelists are native to Louisiana and now make New Orleans their home. So without further ado, I say we jump in to our questions, and hope you don't mind. I've come up with some that I think would be interesting and pertinent to the subject matter today. And Patrick, I'm going to start with you. We've worked together for a long time, and so I've heard you talk a lot. And one of the things that I think you speak very elegantly about is the governance structure of New Orleans, and how that structure is set up in a way that really allows our schools to be flexible, our administrators to do what they need to do. I thought it might be important to kind of set that backdrop for this conversation today. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I hope the backdrop of thunder that's happening right now where I live in Louisiana has been like sunny days for like 45 consecutive days, and today we get a little rain and thunder at this time. But yeah, I'd be happy to. So when I talk about New Orleans and what's unique about our system of schools, we have three sectors that I try to break it down as. So we have what we call the regulators, the innovators, and the collaborators. And the regulator is right on the screen, right with us, Dr. Henderson Lewis, who's our superintendent. And so when you think about the regulatory role, that's for the local school board and the superintendent to establish the framework and the governance structure of those with the privilege to educate young people. So that's everything from creating and supporting a common enrollment system to ensure equitable funding throughout, and then solving for system-wide problems in collaboration with schools in order to ensure we have the best environment for young people and a best environment for our schools to thrive. But then they also had the regulatory role of ensuring that, once they give you the privilege of a contract, whether it's an initial 3 or 5 year contract and for however many years, that they're going to hold you to the standards that you said that you were going to meet every time there's like a renewal opportunity. And so if those individuals aren't making the bar, as we like to say in New Orleans, then the superintendent has the right and authority and the ability to make decisions whether or not to allow schools to continue to exist or to make transformations. And all of that comes from our regulator role. The other roles that we have are what we call the innovators. Those are the individuals that's in schools. And you have both Jamar and Rhonda on this panel who are doing great work with their networks and empowering individuals to really serve kids well. We always say that those closest to children should be able to make the decisions for young people. And so in New Orleans, we have a bunch of innovators. And what it is that they run their schools. They can do their own transportation if they so choose. They do their own curriculum, food services. So they're able to make decisions quickly and nimbly at a very local level. And one of the things that allows them to continue to flourish and thrive is their governance construct. Each of them have to have their own charter board. And so, Jamar and Rhonda have their board chairs and their boards that they're responsible for, but their board also works in conjunction with the elected board from OPSB and the superintendent. And so, all of those entities work together in order to make sure that they're communicating well to serve children well. And then the last part of our sector are what I call the innovators. And myself and Caroline, you are a part of that part of that cohort, part of that group where mostly they're nonprofits who we look and work with schools and we work with the districts to see what some of the needs are that maybe the district, is not in a position to offer, or they may offer it, but will want some, third-party help with the schools. Everything we offer from the nonprofit sector, whether it's NSNO or the Charter School Association, I always like to tell people it's opt-in. So anything that NSNO offers, whether it's the help with the recruitment and retention of teachers, whether it's around instructional quality initiative. We always say schools can opt not to take whatever services or things we're providing, but what we do is we try to do those things that we're hearing from schools and seeing that they actually need. And so when you think about New Orleans, just think about those three sectors: regulators, innovators, and collaborators. And we all work together in order to try to create the best environment for all of our young people.
I think I love the way you break that out. I think that structure makes sense. And I think that, again, in a place like New Orleans, it's really interesting. There are charters across the country, and there's some cities that have, a large portfolio of charters. But right now, New Orleans, other than maybe a couple schools next year, one school, they're all chartered. And I think that brings some really unique challenges sometimes, and also opportunities as an all charter district. And I think, that tees up kind of, to me, Dr. Lewis, for you. If you're the regulator, if we accept Patrick's construct and you're the regulator, you're a superintendent of a district that you really aren't in charge of the day-to-day operations of schools. Talk a little bit about what your work looks like, and in particular during this crisis, how do you, navigate and manage your role, and, as Patrick said, collaborate with the schools that you work with?
Certainly, thank you, Caroline. In the city of New Orleans, we have 45,000 students, and which is across 78 schools. And we have Jamar and Rhonda on the webinar with us today, and they are part of that 38 organizations that we have here in our city. But when it came down to COVID-19 and the thought that it was even coming our way, and it did. March 13th, we actually closed school building. But in those initial days prior to, as the school system or the regulator, if you would, we spent time really working with our school leaders to say that if this crisis comes, we need to talk about what things you need to do in order to be successful when kids are no longer in building, and that we can have, as a school system, three things. One would be continuity of learning. Another would be the continuation of resources. So as the school system, our major job was to understand what those gaps were. And so, for example, our school surveyed their families to understand that there was a gap around connectivity, whether it was laptops or Wi-Fi. And as a school system, we received that information. We worked along with our school board where they allocated money to be able to purchase. So as a result, in our school system, we purchased 10,000 laptops and 8,000 hotspots so that our schools in turn were able to those to their families that actually share with them that there was a need there. And so I'm very proud of the work that has happened, and not just in COVID-19, but just speaking in this moment here for the last 9 weeks. Our 38 charter management organization were able to do things quickly. So I'll give an example. The governor put the order out on Friday, March 13th. On Monday, we started serving food to our students. And by midweek, we had over 40 sites across the city of New Orleans, making sure that our kids received breakfast and lunch. I believe probably on Monday, we probably will be hitting 1 million meals provided to students during this crisis. So again, we do those things at the district level that really supports our schools so they can do the things that they need to do to actually support our students and families. When it comes down to instruction, that autonomy is given to our schools every single day. So our school, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. It makes me think about, like, maybe for some that are on the call that maybe come from more traditional districts.
Yes.
Like, what is what's a learning moment for you? You've been superintendent now
Yes.
in several places, not
Yes.
just New Orleans. So
yes.
What's the takeaway that would be common no matter what type of district or portfolio of schools you have in this role of, collaborating with schools?
So one takeaway, whether it's the New Orleans system or any other system, is it's about relationships. And the relationship that we had established already with our schools, and using them as innovators and being able to say, here are the challenges that are before you. This is what we need to respond to in a very short period of time to make sure we deliver for our students. And so I recognize, because we naturally have 38 different organizations that as a school system we have strong relationships with, they were able to make quick changes that really, in my opinion, made us not only leaders in the state of Louisiana, but probably in the nation when it came down to the response to COVID-19. So that's something that I continue to talk about, and I applaud, because our leaders have done great things for our students and family, and kept them connected to their learning during this very, very tough time.
I'd love, Jamar or Rhonda, this wasn't really what I'd planned to ask, but kind of just piggybacking on the superintendent, as school leaders, what are your thoughts about, again, what the superintendent's talked about, that collaboration, and how does that work with your autonomy to do certain things, but needing support from the district, especially, again, during like this current crisis? Jamar, you want to start for us?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. I think one thing we learned coming up to 15 years ago with Hurricane Katrina was when natural disasters, unfortunate epidemics happen, egos have to be pushed to the side. And it comes time for all of us to work together, not only in the best interest of our families and our students, but our city as a whole. So it's extremely helpful on all the different outlets, all the different individuals coming together to make sure that whatever avenues that we can provide some sense of security, inspiration, compassion for our staff and students, that was put on the forefront. So just like Dr. Lewis and Patrick and you, Caroline, and Rhonda can attest to, we were actually serving meals on that Monday. I remember getting a notification on Friday around 3 p.m. that we'll be closing from the governor. And we already had a game plan, but we just actually went into action to make sure all schools were set up by Monday to serve meals. By the following Thursday, we were talking about technology distribution. We were talking to each other as far as how we were going to communicate to our parents, where it wasn't necessarily about KIPP, Inspire NOLA, or NOPS. It was about the rebirth of New Orleans and how can we recover to make sure our students and families had everything they needed to be successful.
Makes sense. Rhonda, again, as Jamar alluded to, you've lived through quite a few crises in New Orleans, whether man-made, natural, whatever. Your thoughts about all of this?
The thing that I would add to what my friends and co-panelists have said is that I think the other just advantage to our construct that has helped us do our best for families and kids right now is the ability to see just conceptually what would be more efficient to be handled and coordinated district-wide or from some of our partners like NSNO, and where at the same time it's most essential that those who have the relationships with families and the ones, you know, our core responsibility in terms of providing instruction are the ones leading. And I think that is a balance. And in times of crisis, it's a balance that, you know, is probably most at risk if you don't have a solid foundation. And so what I think we've been able to do, and we're still working through, given, you know, that we continue to evolve here in New Orleans, we've been able to all prioritize that balance and make sure that we are thinking smart about who is doing what for families and kids. And so, you know, I think Jamar and I have talked a lot, as, you know, so many of the educators on this call are grappling with also. It's, you know, our families, our students, our teachers, many are suffering in many different ways, some with direct loss, you know, others with loss of more conceptual things like, you know, milestones and high school graduations and these things, but everyone's experiencing that. And so our ability to lead and just really keep our people, our team, our students at the forefront and be able to decide, I think, is something that all of us in New Orleans are always talking about together. And I think the collaboration has helped us do it better.
Totally. Jamar, that kind of leads into what I had thought I'd talk to you about. When I think about Inspire NOLA, not only have you created, you know, an organization that is delivering on the academics in classrooms, frankly, I think just as much about the communications that and the public relation nature of your organization and how well you do that work, meaning connecting with not only your parents, but with the community. As a mom right now with a 6th grader at home, I'd like to hear more from my school. I'd be curious to understand what Inspire NOLA has had to maybe pivot to communications wise, whether again with your teachers, your families, talk a little bit and share out, you know, what you think is working for you right now on that front.
You know, one of the essential takeaways from experiencing our first natural disaster was the sense of loss. For many of us on this call, I can remember that day vividly when all of us had to evacuate, and for numerous days you were not able to talk to your fellow colleagues, you were not able to talk to students, and you were not able to communicate, whether through social media or any type of outlet. That for us, we decided early on to establish a very strong social media network, a very strong outlet when it comes to all different outlets, Twitter, Instagram, internet. We collected all our family email addresses, but even doing that, we still found ourselves at a loss with the lack of internet services that a lot of our families had.
Which is probably something, Jamar, that's probably something that schools across the country experience. So that's why I'm interested, like what would be the message to those about how you rose up to that particular challenge?
Well, it's something that we really are still developing at this time. I can really thank my leadership for taking some risk that all of us have decided to do by even going door to door, making sure those families had computers, had hotspots to be able to connect with us via internet, social media. We sent out a lot of text threads. What's interesting, a lot of our families might not have email addresses or internet, but they have a telephone. So they receive text messages. So we started to really use text messages as a form of communication. We started contacting numerous students who were the student leaders throughout our schools to actually be the messengers for us to carry that message. So if they were a student council president who had a big following, they actually started to spread that message forward. We checked our students' Instagrams who had large followings of students. We started communicating directly with them to have them start to actually get out some of our communication as well, to make sure that everyone stayed connected as much as possible until we were able to provide all of our families, or majority of our families, with outlets for communication. So it's still something that we're developing. Right now, we are touching majority of our families through all the different means that we're starting to communicate. Families are reaching out to us as well. I really do wish our city had the means to have 100% connectivity internet, but that's something that we'll push on later. But our families are starting to respond. Now we're starting to transition to those few families who still have connection issues that we have not connected to for various different reasons, to find out why they're not turning in assignments, why they're not following up with teachers, why they're not answering phone calls, to see exactly what's happening from that means.
That's some good stuff. I had that Instagram, like, yeah, that's a good idea. It's not something that would have crossed my mind. So again,
I tell you what's interesting. We started being a little bit more creative by creating competitions. And within that competition, we have a selective message that we would like for them to post. But they always would focus on the competition, but as well get the message that we were trying to push forward.
That's excellent. You know, Rhonda, again, I'm kind of going out of line here, but Jamar focused, as I asked him to, about communications to his families. I know KIPP has a real reputation for such a strong teacher culture. Is there anything KIPP's doing right now around communications with your teachers and your educators that you would think is something worth sharing with others that you've learned from or figured out works better than something else?
You know, I think very similar to Jamar, where we've learned these things along the way. I would say, like, what's been real interesting for us, and something that I, hadn't really like clicked at the beginning, but what we're seeing develop is sort of, is more like joint family communication with teachers. So lots of times where, people are catching up on Zoom or phone or whatever, and you've got like mom and graduating 8th grader and teacher, then connecting with principal. So, something that would have happened in the hallway or on the way out at the bus stop, like these authentic just conversations. Whereas in the beginning, I think we were very formal about, like, teachers be on the call from 1 to 2 and here's your office hours. As people have figured out what can happen through things like this webinar and Zoom and other things, we're starting to see more authentic things develop. And we're, cherishing and promoting that and thinking about that as we think about the next phase of this that we're all going to start planning for.
One of the things that you and I talked about for this panel was KIPP's work in the area of mental health. Again, hate to keep going back to Katrina, but it was such a traumatic event and now crisis that we're in now. Talk a little bit about the work y'all are doing around that.
Yeah, I think, you said it and we've all been talking about it. It's not the same, but there are a lot of similarities. So we're trying to think about those years that we all sort of got back and started to rebuild, and think about, what did we do that worked, but what are the lessons learned and how would we do things differently? The way I've been thinking about it is twofold. One is sort of like what we did and are still doing in the immediate and the reaction to the crisis. We were, this is where we get to like innovators and being able to do what works for our network. We actually created a family and student hotline that our social workers across all of our schools have taken turns to manage. And this is about kids and families in crisis and in dire need who either need help or need to be connected to resources, food, homeless shelters here were closed. And so thinking about, where to stay if a family didn't have a place to stay, things like that. And that was, well received, and also gave our team a sense of purpose. And also a way to analyze the world and see sort of where our students were and what was happening. And so we're really proud of that, and that worked for us. And so many of my colleagues in New Orleans did similar things that worked for them. I think moving forward, I have 2 lessons that we learned from Katrina that are very much on our mind as we think about mental health moving forward. One is that the adults will have also experienced trauma. the caretakers, the social workers, the principals, Inspire NOLA and KIP New Orleans and several other folks across the country and in New Orleans lost key staff members and team members to COVID-19. And so, you know, that is real, and that is a loss and a process, a grieving process that adults are still going to have to go through. And so you have to really care for and look out for, as a leader, how you're going to help the adults be there for the students, because the adults are also experiencing trauma. And then the last sort of learning that we had was, for the most part, you can put in structures through your clinical services, you know, structure as a network to help most of the kids. But sometimes there are kids in dire crisis. And I think one of our learnings is potentially we didn't move fast enough at times to intervene when we saw signs of kids who just were not adapting. And so that's very much on our mind as we think about returning, how to intervene quicker for students who might, and families who might need a little bit more support earlier as we rebuild.
It's, you know, the work is so hard, and then to put these types of crisis in place, it just makes it that much harder. It makes me think, I'll flip over to Dr. Lewis and to you, Patrick. I'll start with you, Patrick, as again, a collaborator. You and I collaborate a lot on thinking about policy and those sorts of things. As schools are having to pivot in this just totally unprecedented moment across the country, what are your thoughts? Because I know you and I are both very passionate about high standards, accountability. What is that going to look like for charters in particular moving forward? And then Dr. Lewis, if you can join in with Patrick and talk about maybe what the district's thinking about, if you're comfortable doing that moving forward on things like renewals that you have. Patrick, thinking around that since you've...
Yeah, you know, giving some thought to with a number of other things, honestly. I mean, this is, you know, I keep saying that this work is complex, nuanced, and hard. And after almost 30 years, you know, anyone who oversimplifies stuff, it just frustrates me, and I'm just lacking tolerance for that. So the accountability question is absolutely complex because, you know, we were just really starting to understand over the last several years how much student growth in an individual year should be weighted, like way more than we're weighting it now when you think about like absolute student performance. And look, 15 years ago, I probably was first in line on absolute performance. And like, if you started out as an F and the bar was a D in 3 years, then you better get to that bar. And if you missed it by a point, we're not going to let you continue on and bring somebody else in. And we gradually raised the standards. But years later, we realized that there are some schools that continue to have challenging student populations, but the growth that they're making with them each and every year is way better than the average as compared to peers throughout the state of Louisiana and even nationally. So what I would encourage folks to do is that they control and think about accountability is two ways. One, don't retreat from demanding that we give all of our students like strong standards and give them the education in order for them to meet that so that they can compete with students not only within this country, but around the world. But then secondly, have some understanding and some empathy as the decision makers have to think about, well, what will it look like now going forward? Because what I'm finding more dealing with this crisis is how systemic inequities are like have a bigger light shined upon them. And there are things that I'm wrestling with in how do we define school quality with metrics that are outside of just like testing and letter grades. And we were just on the cusp of starting to try to define those things and then figure out from NSNO's perspective, could we put metrics in place that quite honestly, like philanthropy that so generously gives us money to give to schools to expand and grow. How can we do metrics outside of the traditional metrics? And I think what we're going to have to look at now in an accountability framework is take into a lot of factors, and it might be safety, healthcare. It might be the types of economic backgrounds that some of our parents actually have. Because when you think about it, a lot of our parents, like we're doing all the distance thinking, but some of our parents, particularly in New Orleans, they have to go back to work. Like, and they got like second and third and fifth grade at home, and it's just the mom who's got to work 2 jobs because we don't give fair wages to women or all across this country. So then how's that going to work? She's got to go to work. The kids got to get educated. So now we got to think about how to get in buildings and make it safe. Because as Rhonda said, like teachers got trauma, right? And staff has trauma. And so when you think about an accountability system, like it's got to be nuanced in my mind enough to factor in for some societal challenges, yet still hold the bar for high quality. And anybody who thinks that's easy or simple, shoot me a note, tell me what the solution is, because otherwise we got a lot of work ahead of us.
You know, Superintendent, I want to hear from you. Again, you're going to be in a spot where you're going to have to make decisions about schools, and now in a world where, like, what are we going to be looking at? In fact, I'm sorry to jump in, one of our audience members specifically says, you know, what kind of data are we collecting, both as schools and maybe as the regulator? And then someone else challenges in their question, you know, are we going to try to look at this differently? Is it mean, you know, you're doing well because you have a large number of students that are logging in on a daily basis? Like, how are we going to define, you know, quality at this point?
Yes, and certainly even as we think of accountability and around how we give our schools renewals, you know, that's one side of it. But then when you think of just the instruction in our schools moving forward, it's going to be different. And I'll talk about even accountability around renewal. So we have schools, for example, that are now coming up for renewal. In this moment here, we know that we won't receive school performance scores. And so we're working through a process that will allow us to be able to address renewals. But that process also allows us to step back to say that, okay, our academic metrics has been really around state testing, right? And just as Patrick mentioned, we're going to have other metrics that are going to allow us to really talk about the quality of a school, and the state assessment and even the growth index information should become components of how we ultimately make decisions in the future about the long-term success of a school. Because we all know that even Louisiana, and particularly New Orleans, we have spent the last three, and for some schools, if they got an early start, the last 4 years of the preparation for implementation of Tier 1 high quality curriculum. It was very, very hard. It's very, very challenges. With NSNO, we had these hubs where we had teacher leaders would all meet to actually learn how to do the implementation, go back to their schools to redeliver that information. So now it's not Tier 1 curriculum I'm talking about. The new thing is now is how to become proficient at delivering on distance learning. And just as we have spent a lot of time to invest in our teachers around the curriculum, now it's going to be investing a lot of time to get them to be prepared to actually instruct our students in a very remote way that many of them are not used to. For example, I talked to a seasoned educator and she said to me, "Superintendent, when I got my degree in education, I didn't sign on to teach kids through a computer." And so we know that we have some serious challenges. So as we think of accountability, and accountability is going to be there, but we have to continue to invest in our educators during this time here because they're going to need it. This is new learning for them, and they're expected to be able to do this for our young people overnight. Think about teaching reading remotely. We have some serious challenges there. If we cannot get our K2 in building, we're going to have some serious challenges. So again, it's one thing, and we're going to continue to talk about the accountability, but really where I am in this moment is really looking at how we're going to support and grow our teachers because we need them.
Yeah, it's a great point. Open to the panel to jump on top of that question. You know, Jamar, thinking about accountability, and maybe not even looking ahead, looking at this very moment that you're in, an abbreviated school year, one that has been totally turned upside down. How are you judging? Like, what does success look like to you and your organization right now for the students and teachers? Like, what do you think about when you're thinking of, like, how do I know we're doing all right?
You know, it's definitely a great question. And I reflect on, unfortunately, Rhonda at KIPP and Inspire NOLA, we are two organizations that have lost staff members in our schools. I can think about numerous teachers and staff members who have also lost family members at home. I can think about students who've lost family members at home. And frankly, the notion of accountability to those families and students is not what their focus is as of right now. Their focus is how do they live? how do they beat this virus so they can actually have some sense of normalcy? And how can they actually be in a position, as Rhonda mentioned, socially, emotionally whole and in a good place? So when we are able to talk about school, we are able to talk about learning and accountability, they're in a place to be able to accept it. So for us as an organization, we've decided to take a step back, to be very compassionate and have a lot of empathy with our staff members, because distant learning is not designed to actually be teaching your own students at home and teaching students on the computer at the same time. So we're balancing a lot of different things from our perspective to make sure from a social emotional standpoint, our families, our students, our staff members are whole. They have various different means to be from a social and mentally standpoint, okay, to provide some of those needs to actually see them through, to see some sunlight at the end of the tunnel. New Orleans, unfortunately, was one of the cities early who had a very high spike where we just had to stabilize from an aspect of we can get through this. We're here to support each other. We kind of rolled the aspect of learning and distant learning even slower with the understanding of numerous staff members, numerous students, families who were affected by the virus. That accountability, we're touching that topic slowly, but we still have very high expectations where students are still doing distant learning work. They're still turning in assignments. They're still understanding our expectation when it comes to excellence. But at the forefront, I'm more concerned about their mental, social, emotional health, to make sure from that standpoint first, they're okay. And if I could get them feeling in a good place there, I honestly believe we can catch them up. Although they have been behind and are losing some valuable learning time, I feel like we, as an organization, we can make that up.
Rhonda, how about you? What's happening in KIP on that?
Very similar thinking to what Jamar just said. I think, you know, if you step out of this moment and think about an excellent classroom, excellent teaching and learning is happening because of amazing relationships that are built between the teacher and the student and the family. And so the way that we've thought about, you know, where is this working, who's doing this well, is if, you know, students are engaged and there's that connection. And if it was happening, if the connection was there and the school and the classroom was strong, then it's happening now. In a different phase, we'll think about the rigor and the content and all, but right now it's just been about connecting and connectivity to everyone and making sure that we're keeping people engaged, curious, interested, committed to learning, and feeling stable and healthy.
Can I jump in and ask, and Jamar, feel free to jump in. Rhonda, are you seeing, let's think about the academics, but are you learning things that absolutely are not working in a virtual world academically? Like maybe it all is kind of messed up, but like certain subject matters more so than others?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like the technical aspects of this, right? Like having people like sort of like read a passage and discuss is simpler than like, you know, what you would do in a classroom around like breaking down a math problem, right? It's just like the logistics of this get more complicated in certain subjects. But my experience so far, you know, this is all very limited and it's hard to observe teachers as the administrators too, right? But my takeaway so far is that teachers who were excellent are figuring out a way to make this happen. And so there's some master model teachers to be able to look at. I don't know what you think, Jamar.
I agree with you. We're really having a lot of conversations to allow our students to express their feelings based on passages, based on different realities that they're facing. Our teachers are really almost being social workers now, building up our students emotionally and socially to understand what they're going through, what the need is, to even be that sense of inspiration just to see a familiar face. Some lessons we've learned, when you have the structure throughout the day where students are normally catching the bus at 7 o'clock and at school by 8, distant learners is interesting when they don't have the same demands, that timeliness of being on the computer for 8 o'clock. So we make some classroom time adjustments in some cases for those seniors or those juniors who just not used to signing on the computer doing work, or just the understanding of how are you teaching class with the parents in the background, talking to the students about being focused. The kids are looking at television at the same time. It's those type of things that staff members are making those adjustments and having a lot of understanding because this is new from the daily day.
Superintendent Lewis, I know you have a hard stop because you are going to a virtual school board meeting,
Yes.
which I think is interesting. I don't know how, much that's happening around the country. I'd love to hear your perspective just in governance virtually and the success, you believe you're having as a district continuing, let's just call it the business of the district.
Yeah, we recognize even in the very beginning, and as we support our schools, we had to get things up and running to respond to COVID-19 and make sure all 38 of our charter management organizations that were good, but then also even just from our board president, just working along with the board to say that we have to do that, but then also the business of the district must continue to move forward. We have like active construction projects going on and the list goes on. And so we wanted to find ways to make sure that we are able to still conduct the business of the district just like we have done in previous times, except now, even like today, our board meeting is going to be virtual, but it's still making sure that those things that we need to procure for the upcoming school year, those, like I said, construction projects that are happening, that we are still able to actually get those things done, because even using the construction project, Jamar, they're moving into Edna-Carr, a brand new school, right? And so again, we want to still deliver on those dates that we promised in the midst of this crisis that's happening. I also, before I go, as Rhonda and Jamar was talking about how they work with their students, with their teachers, and being able to observe and what the challenges are. Well, of course, I'm a parent of a senior in our school system, and it was very, very interesting to see the variations from all of her teachers of how it was approached to doing the distance learning. And as Rhonda said, as you would see a teacher that you may have felt was doing an excellent job before this happened, you felt that same way. But there were times where an assignment may have, or the teacher was given work for my child to do, where we had to go on the side and do some additional teaching, if you would, to have her to understand what she was being asked to do. And that's a great point I want to make today, because as we prepare for the upcoming school year, that's very, very unknown to us about how long students will be able to physically be in buildings, how many kids can be in the building at a time, that I experienced it as a parent. And so we have to take this time over the summer to engage with our parents, with our teachers, and everyone, so that we can know what those challenges are and we can put things in place for the upcoming school year as we prepare to have a solid school year. Before COVID-19 happened, we were having an excellent school year. This was a little bump along the way, but we want to, as a system of schools, to have a very successful year, even though we may be in the midst of a crisis.
Well, Patrick, one of the questions here was specifically around what schools need from the system, during this time, and in particular thinking about teacher, and professional development and that sort of thing. And I know that NSNO has spent a lot of time around the teacher pipeline and that development and things. Any thoughts about what that looks like right now for schools doing that type of stuff? I know the department is looking at it. The State Department is considering those things as well. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, one thing we're looking at particularly is the opportunity to maybe get mid-career switchers, so to speak, to education. So we literally reached out to two of the major business councils in New Orleans last week. I sent them a note and linked them up with my team with the thinking of, look, there may be individuals who, because of the type of career they were in, may not be able to get back to work, and they might have had like an inkling to want to be a classroom teacher. And we can use quality individuals coming into the classroom and work through alternate certification programs or even some traditional programs. And so, the thinking is that perhaps education might be one of the more stable workforces. And so what can we do to support teachers really well? And we surveyed teachers, about 1,500, I guess it was year before last when we started our teacher work. And it's interesting. And I had a teacher I was interviewing last week or 2 weeks ago. And it's interesting because most teachers' pay increase is not at the top of their list of what they want. The number one thing has been support and professional development. And so we're trying to look at ways to be able to give them in this time, whether it's through distance learning, whether it's support, just the physical support. I mean, I was just trying to wrap my mind around the fact the other day, feeling as though if you believe that we will have to have school buildings in some way, shape, or form to be open, then how much PPE are we going to need? Like a basic thing. And in my mind is like states and cities, we need to be shoring that up right now. We should have been doing it months ago, actually, to make certain that teachers who will be like another line of frontline workers and students have actually all of the PPE that they actually need. And to me, that's support. And then you professionally develop around how to use it, how to dispose of it. I mean, we're rethinking everything, but looking for mid-career switchers and thinking how we can protect teachers, knowing that they're going to have to be in the building, and to develop them around that is going to be critical to work on over the next several weeks.
You touched on something that I should have asked probably Dr. Lewis directly, but he left, which, by the way, really glad that he was able to join us. Rhonda, maybe, like, what are y'all talking to each other right now about next school year? I mean, I know we're all these little independent, charters, but I know you also spend a lot of time collaborating with each other. What does the next school year look like? What things are y'all thinking about?
Yeah. Oh, this is a big one. And we're all spending a lot of time speculating. I think right now, what some of us are talking about is sort of the discipline to try to figure out what we can control now and what we should prepare for. To Patrick's point, no matter what, there are supplies and ways that we need to be thinking about our facilities that have to happen no matter which scenario, right? Assuming that you're not going to be in a virtual year all year, which we will work hard to have students back in some way, shape, or form, because we believe that needs to happen. And so, we're trying to chunk it in terms of what can you control and take care of now versus don't go down the rabbit hole of deeply making strategic plans for 15 different scenarios and financial models and schedules when really things are shifting, and our state government, and I think everybody probably has a similar experience, governors and mayors are putting out, phases. And so even if you say we're in phase 1 in Louisiana today, if we get to phase 2, if we're going to have gatherings of 25 people, okay, what does that mean for school? And so we're certainly collaborating with our peers. We're talking about the calendar, how to stay aligned so that families have something more convenient. But the big question around what is the economy going to look like, and are parents going to work or not? Because that really determines, what needs to happen, that coordination. I think we're not there yet as a city, and we're all sort of trying to figure out how to get that to happen as soon as possible.
Caroline, can I jump in here just for a second?
Yeah, sure, Mary, please. Senator, excuse me.
Yeah, that's okay. I just wanted to jump in and maybe ask a question, make a comment open to Patrick, Jamar, and Rhonda. The more I think about it, just so many of our families in New Orleans particularly, this is true throughout the whole country in many school districts, but particularly in a city like New Orleans, where the poverty rate is so high, but the essential workers are also so high. Like, our parents don't have the luxury of working from home. I mean, when our economy opens up, as you all know, restaurants, conventions to some degree, nurses, so many of our parents who were low income, working poor, are, quote, essential workers. So I would just throw out an opportunity for you all to be challenged when we think about space. Some of these kids could be so helped by actually, sometimes homes are comfortable places for kids to work because they have room and their parents can negotiate all this. But in many of our families, that is, that's not. In many of our families, that's not even possible. I'm wrapping my head around this as y'all are speaking. So my point being, for our charters, since they're so innovative, our buildings are brand new, they're spacious, as you all know. Many of our buildings, we have beautiful buildings in our system. It's one thing, the legacy of Katrina. that just getting kids out of their homes into spaces where the internet works. You might even think about schools not even being in regular classrooms, just spaces that are safe in buildings where kids can get access to, you know, good quality learning on the screen. That would be such a help to so many parents that are going to have so much to juggle with. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes in cramped quarters, sometimes in 1 or 2 room homes. I mean, we really could really pioneer almost kind of a different way of thinking about buildings and returns. I just throw that out. I don't know any thoughts that y'all might have about it.
I think both of us actually, and all of us actually agree with you. I think when you look at our economics of our city, when you think about how many of the families that we're currently serving in our schools are below the poverty line, I don't see how they get back to work without schools being open. For me, it's an essential function to try to find creative ways to provide that avenue of support, not only for our students, but our families as well. I can think about numerous students where school is their safe haven for them. It's where they can get that guaranteed meal. It's where they can actually get technology working every single day. That I think we have to do everything possible to make sure schools are not only safe for our teachers and staff members, but can open for our families and students to have that sense of normalcy as fast as possible. Safety is our #1 variable to make sure we have everything that we can have. And once that's figured out, I'm ready to go, even if I have to open up early as July, to try to catch up on that learning loss, as well as start to engage our students in some social emotional healing. I think you won't find too many of us not willing to open. You won't find too many organizations shying away from that responsibility to do everything we can do to get our kids back with us as fast as possible.
Patrick, do you have thoughts on that?
I just echo that, and I still keep pushing. Though I will continue to push on like the systemic inequities. You know, I keep talking about the intersectionality, and when I took over NSNO 3 years ago, one of the biggest regrets I had when I was in government was that I didn't see and then push hard enough to try to break up some of the systemic inequities around lack of fair wages for women and a lot of like just service industry workers, having more affordable healthcare, having better housing situations, so affordable housing, all of those areas, because no matter how much we fix education, like this coronavirus is showing us how as soon as you have something like this, it's still a have and have nots. You still have schools that might have magnet components or even some selectivity. And those families tend to be middle class, upper middle class, you know, and they don't miss a beat. Like they are there, they could be with their kids, their jobs afford them to like work from home remotely. And it's just like, you know, we're inconvenienced, but we're living. Our kids and our families are surviving, and they survive in the best of times. So these are the worst of times. And so my thing is, legislators and those that are able to influence policy, we got to get past the politics and really start figuring out how to pay people more wages, how to have more stable and affordable housing, all those things that people actually use schools for in order to better their life outcomes. But now that the schools and everything else is kind of in flux, we've taken away some of the one most stable place in most of our kids' lives. And so, you know, I love what Jamar said. It's like, I'm ready to go in a moment's notice. And Rhonda's the same way. But what we have to do is those of us that are in different parts of the sectors, we really got to push each other and push businesses and other folks to figure out ways to make it better for our most challenged families while there's almost time for a reset. Because what's going to happen is once we move further along into this, we're going to start settling into a new normal. And I'm worried that the have-nots will continue to be the have-nots.
Totally agree, Patrick. I know from the role I play as an advocate on behalf of charter schools, we are often in the legislature and very intentionally take ourselves into other committee rooms on issues that we know are impacting the kids and the families that our membership serves. We can't be so narrow-minded and this is all just about K-12 accountability or funding. Like you said, there are so many other issues impacting those families and in New Orleans and across the country. So I think that that's something I would say to those on this call, and I've said it before in other rooms. I do think that as, you know, advocates for kids and education, we have to kind of pivot sometimes and find ourselves in other rooms really champion on those other things, whether it's, you know, judicial reform, whatever those things may be. Like you said, minimum wage, because oftentimes what I see are the very people that really support choice, families should have more choices, sometimes are the same legislators that do not support us on other things, and then vice versa. People that don't support charters, but they support these other things. So I think
Exactly.
It's a good point.
We've seen that work so much. And I got to shout out Senator Landrieu, because she's been one of those oftentimes lone voices, and been on like the side of a vote where those individuals who she's trying to work across the aisle with, but then they politicize charter and they politicize all these different things. And it makes it hard, because it's like in a labor committee, you get something thrown against you because you supported something in the education committee. So shout out to Senator Landrieu, because you've been consistent in your leadership, whether you were in government or now in the private sector, and really pushing for those other areas. So I just would be remiss if I didn't.
I really appreciate that, Patrick, and thank you so much. And I mean, you all are all just extraordinary in your own right, but I really think, I don't know what I expected in this webinar, but I'm leaving more challenged than maybe when I started listening to you guys, really getting my head around what the summer, Jamar and Rhonda, is going to look like for our families, like July, August, September, and really thinking about the other resources in our city that can step up and be that structural support for our kids who do not have comfortable places to work at home, who only have one room. So if the television's on because there's a grandmother that's sick that needs to watch it, how can they also study? To get a computer into the home, to get our internet, because this could happen again. I mean, we're hoping that this is the only wave we have, but you don't know. So I think we should prepare ourselves to be able to teach our kids in schools. And then when I say at home, let's think about that. I'm not even sure it's at home. It's just in an alternate place other than the classroom. It could be at like a local law firm. I mean, they could say, look, I'll take 50 kids. I'll put them in our lobby. We spread them out. We can put some of our, junior attorneys helping them out 3 hours a day, because they can't do this at home. We have high-speed internet here. And that's what I love about our system, that we can just go beyond and think, okay, we got this. How can we do this? Because we can't leave our kids in some of the situations they're in now without the access. They'll get too far behind.
And I think, Senator, I'd like to hear your thinking. There was a question earlier posed. We're talking New Orleans. It's, majority charter schools, what I would call a friendlier than not scenario with the governing body, Orleans. But the fact is, both in Louisiana and across the country, you have charters sitting in districts that are not in collaborative relationships, and they're not at the table on thinking about these things. And the question specifically was like, if I'm in a place where as a charter, I'm not a priority, do you have any thoughts about how I can make my voice better heard? And since you've long time been in politics, any advice for those folks sitting in those types of circumstances?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, and really, I think Henderson's the one to ask, but Patrick and Jamar and Rhonda, you all know the specifics of a charter, but I think if for charter schools, you have a charter, I think it gives you a lot of freedom to start when you want, conduct your business how you want. And so I think it's going to be a really interesting time, even in a district, Caroline, that wouldn't be that supportive of charters, that a charter school says, look, you may not be supportive of me, but I'm supportive of myself. And according to my charter, I can do lots of things, and I'm going to be extremely creative with my students and figure this out. So I don't know, would you all think that would get pushback, Patrick or Jamar or Rhonda? I don't really, I'm trying to think of the Baton Rouge School District. What would they say if a charter school wanted to open up in July? I mean, it's up to the parents, but like I know from what Jamar and they're saying, our parents can't wait to get their kids back into some kind of school system, because it's so hard for them to work their 2 jobs and at minimum wage. They don't have the kind of housing that maybe some middle-class families have. And it's like, please, Lord, help us get these kids to school so we can kind of stabilize our situations. I don't know, Patrick, what do you think?
I would tell a person that, if you're getting pushback from your authorizer or the local district is not being supportive, try to continue to, I'm hoping you're doing this, but I would assume you are, but just to push on the human element. I ran into that when I was over to RSD and we're in Baton Rouge, where it was a different climate. You mentioned Baton Rouge, Senator, and you know, when I would get into these conversations with some of these bureaucrats and what I would call preservationists of the old guard, you know, at the end of the day, I was like, look, these are children. And if you withhold money, buildings, or anything, you're withholding that from children whose parents are taxpayers. Charter schools are public schools. And so then, to me, it's then you lend voice to, let your family's voice speak. And, you know, I always say everything we do have consequences. And if individuals around the country are denying families from having resources that they need in a very trying time, there's some elected official that needs to hear, and there are some authorizers that need to hear, and parent voices. Rally them out. You know, Caroline's organization has been great. I'm sure she could give advice. You know, you get people to come out, but try to humanize it. And I always say, I'm always hopeful that people don't look at kids as just like how much state dollars they get per child, but they really look at what it actually is. It is a human being. And so I really would just press on that, particularly in this time, where hopefully that some people have a lot of humanity about them. But I'm a little alarmed because at the number of people who don't wear masks when they're out makes me think about, they don't think about others more than they think about how they feel about it. So to me, it's always think of others first. So I would stress our leaders to think of the children and put the children first and foremost in their mind.
Totally agree. Well, our question board is clear. I've asked my questions. Does anybody have any closing thoughts? Again, I always struggle if I've met the goals of things that I'm directing, and the goal here was to try to share out some thoughts and learning moments for people throughout the country. So I'd like everyone to give just a closing thought without putting any one person on the spot. Is there anyone volunteering to close out on that question of like, what's your one, what should we call it, tip? One thing that if you could pack it up and package it and send it out to charters across the country, what would that be in this moment of COVID for you? Jamar, can I make you go first?
The webinar started with playing second line music. For me, it reminded me of Rebirth Brass Band. And I think one of the things that I definitely hold high is the rebirth of how we all can get through this. Like, how do we make this situation a better situation for not only our students, faculty members, once we get through this? So that means for us making sure our technology is up to par now, making sure distant learning is something that's seamless for us, making sure from a compassionate empathy standpoint, we're touching the needs of our families and students even more. So for me, rebirth is something that I always try to understand on what the end looks like when you're going through a crisis. How do you actually come back even stronger when you're actually going through these trying times? So for me, a simple word is rebirth. And I know you asked just for a simple suggestion, but that's how I kind of look at this moment each and every day. I try to focus on how much it's going to be better once it's all over compared to the crisis I'm going through now.
I think very well said. How about you, Rhonda? Any thoughts?
I've had the chance to talk to a lot of national folks because I'm part of a national network. And so what I would just say, if anyone takes anything away from this group on the call, is that, 15 years ago, all of us had a moment where we thought we weren't going to get out of this and our city was dead and the world was very bleak. And so I think, hopefully what you're hearing today is that you can rebuild and collaborate and things can be good again. And so in lots of ways, I think going through those experiences have given me confidence, like Jamar said, that it can be done. And so, for what we've said in our organization is, because everyone, talks about the world is changing, it'll never be the same. The what and the why of what we are all doing is actually the same. It's the how we're going to do it that's going to look a little different over the next year. But when you think about it like that, it's so doable.
Totally agree. How about you, Patrick?
Yeah, I think of being strong. So I've been lately quoting the late, great Bob Marley, who is attributed with saying, you never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. And so I would encourage everybody to just stay strong. We're going to need to have a resolve. We're going to need to have a steadfastness, and we're going to need to have just a fortitude that is impenetrable and that we have to stay strong. And so I would encourage everybody to stay strong, stay safe, and stay looking for opportunities to serve our children well.
Well said. How about you, Senator?
I cannot improve upon those closing remarks. So thank you, Caroline. You did a beautiful job, and thank you, Nina.
Thank you. Well, I'll quote, you went Bob Marley, I'll go my mama. My mama tells me the only thing you can count on is change. And so I think change is here. And I think we, can look at it as an opportunity to improve and identify on things that we can do better. And my goal personally as an advocate will be to really work harder on those things that are out of the control of our educators, but that they need so badly to do their work well, i.e. broadband, more resources financially, etc. So again, thank you, panel. I really enjoyed being here, and I am now going to turn it back over to you, Nina, to close us out.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Apologies that we went over for a few minutes, but I would just want to take a minute again to thank Senator Landrieu for initiating this discussion, to Carolyn Romer, our partner in Louisiana, for moderating the panel, to Patrick Dobard and Dr. Henderson for their leadership, and as always, to Jamar McNeely and to Rhonda Eloise for the work that they do on a day-to-day basis on the ground. My apologies again that the video didn't work at the top of the hour. The video will be available on our website, but if I can just spend 1 second, I'm just going to read the names of the schools that won these awards this year. And they are Baxter Academy for Technology and Science in Portland, Maine, Common Ground High School in New Haven, Connecticut, Discovery Charter School in Rochester, New York, the SSD Public Schools in Denver, Colorado, Harmony Public Schools in Texas, Impact Public Schools in Washington State, KIPP Columbus in Ohio, Palms West Charter School in Florida, the Raul Izaguirre Schools of Success in Houston, and last but not least, the Springs Charter Schools in California. These are just 10 schools that were nominated and selected for these awards. We know there are many, many more out there. And so thank you all for joining us on this webinar, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.